everyone, and welcome back to Winden. Today we're going to be working on the old town in the city. As you can see, zooming in here, a lot of the town has already been built. That has all been done off camera. I did that just, trying to get it familiar with the new assets that I have for the series, as well as just to get familiar with the new building style, since, of course, Berlin and that type of German city is much different than what I'm going for here with a much more smaller, somewhat rural city. But yeah, so in addition to the old town here that we're going to be working on, we're also going to be doing the city hall, town hall, whatever you want to call it, as well as one final little forest hotel at the very end of the episode. But yeah, let's get into it. So for the old town, I was considering for a little bit what exactly to style it in, right? So what type of architectural style. So on the workshop, there's pretty much just, you have your options with the half-timbered homes, a lot by Titan, and pretty much actually all these buildings, I believe, are by Titan. He makes really great assets for more historical German towns. But yeah, the other options being like the Renaissance and then Baroque. So I decided to go with Baroque partially because that's kind of my favorite architectural style and artistic style in European history. So I definitely kind of favor that. Although those half-timber homes that Titan just released recently are really good, I kind of wanted to go with something slightly more modern. Of course, modern in the sense of, 18th century more so, which isn't, of course, modern, but, something newer compared to, Renaissance, or I know some of the half-timbered homes can go all the way back to medieval times. So I'm not super duper familiar with, the architecture of Europe or Germany, really anywhere in Europe, and exactly what time periods they are associated with. Because, at least for me personally, since, like I said, I'm not familiar, I don't look at this stuff very often. Some Renaissance architecture can look kind of similar to Baroque. I know Baroque is supposed to be a lot more elegant, but at times it looks a little similar. So I think I do use a few Renaissance type buildings in this little old town, since I was going for more smaller buildings, as you can see. I mean, with the exception of this one right here that I placed down, which, as I'm talking about it, I'm converting it to PO so I can actually shrink it down a level. So, as you see, just got rid of one of the little levels there, which is a nice little trick. Depends probably on the asset, how easy it'll be. That asset was fortunately pretty easy to convert to PO and then get rid of one of the levels. But yeah, if you ever have a tall building, you can always, you want to scale down, make it a little shorter, you could do that, and it's pretty simple. But yeah, so in addition, the other buildings that I was using are some that I'm placing down right now, the second, which I don't know if that's Renaissance, Baroque, or what. I would guess Baroque, but again, I'm not super familiar with this. Those assets are new. They are a part of, I think it's just like a small German village collection, which I don't know the name of the creator, but they've been released over the past couple months, and I believe he probably has a bunch that he's working on and releasing, because they keep, coming to the workshop one by one, every week or so. But they're really nice buildings. They are a lot shorter, right? There's only 3 levels, really, 2-3 levels on them, which, I kind of probably would have preferred them to be slightly bigger, but it still worked out, and they are really nice assets, and like I said, they're brand new, so I wanted to use them since I saw them on the workshop, and since, they're not really something I can necessarily use in Berlin Noir, I figured, this was going to be my pretty much only opportunity to use these assets, so I figured, why not? But so yeah, hopefully I'm able to capture, pretty accurately the type of small German town that would be realistic for something like this. If not, I guess give me some tips or maybe some assets that I should add or replace, some of the assets in here with. But either way, I think it turned out good, just overall once, we of course finish it. I do add some decals, so it's not just that standard pavement, since that wouldn't be very, very realistic for an old town. So don't worry, that does come later. But yeah, I'm mostly just trying to make it pretty small, I guess tight, right? The walkways, with the exception of those roads that go through it. Yeah, so like I've never been really to a old German town. I've mentioned before that my only journey or my only trip to Germany was to Munich several years ago after I graduated high school, and that was also on a trip with a bunch of other people from school, in fact. So I didn't have like complete freedom to go wherever I wanted, so we were a little more limited to what the tour guide wanted and what, when you had your free time, what your group wanted to do or whatever. So I don't really recall ever going to, with the exception of Marienplatz. Is that it? I don't recall. And after a quick little search on Google Maps there, yes, it is indeed Marienplatz. So that is one of the areas that we, definitely went to. So that is, around the old town. But nonetheless, there's still a whole lot of new modern buildings there, of course. So, it wasn't a very, like, authentic old town feel, I guess. Again, that's really my only experience, so I can't really say exactly. But honestly, what first came to my mind when I was building this was the type of old towns in Italy, believe it or not. And of course, not the same type of architecture, since a lot of that would probably be more, yeah, some of the stuff that's similar to this would probably, I guess, be Renaissance, but the same general feel, I guess, which is what I'm going for, right? The small alleyways and just the windy roads, which I guess is more or less common with any type of old European town, regardless really of the country. But seeing as that's really my only personal experience, that's actually where I kind of drew some, creativity and just so, yeah, I guess it's a little weird to use that, but that's really all I had to go off of, since you can only look at maps so much, and, to really get a more authentic feel, I had to tap into something that I've experienced and remembered. So that was it for me. But yeah, so as you can see, I don't have too many building types of these Baroque style, right? So I only subscribe to a few, those smaller ones of Titan's assets, and then these ones, and again that I'm placing right now, the second, those are the newer ones that I talked about a second ago, that are pretty much all a lot smaller. So yeah, so those are pretty much all the assets that I had for this. I think I worked in a couple more modern buildings, since I figure pretty much regardless of where you are in Germany in the old town, there's going to be some number of modern buildings, right? So as far as the history, if we were to say this is a real German town, right? In our real world, so then of course the history of it, who knows? All I said so far is that it's in West Germany, since this is based off of the show Dark. The show doesn't really give any hints as to what the town looks like, since it is actually filmed in and around like Potsdam and Berlin. So obviously that stuff would have been in East Germany, even though the show itself takes place in West Germany. So I guess the creators didn't really care to actually pinpoint an actual location or like make it after a real city, since they want it to be more generic. So that is kind of still what I'm going for in this type of city. But yeah, so like I guess when it comes to really German towns and cities, especially since this is fictional, you can more or less say really whatever you want as far as its history, right? So whether or not it was touched by Allied bombings or fighting during World War II. So of course that is probably the greatest, had the greatest impact on city development and reconstruction, at least in Western Germany. So I guess we could say that at some point maybe this was lightly grazed by perhaps Allied bombing or some small skirmishes, nothing too significant to greatly affect the landscape and the buildings in the town. So that's why for the most part I'm sticking to mostly these historical buildings. Just I think I only put a couple modern ones But around this, so basically my old town is this small little block here. So I think I do most of it off camera. I'm not sure if I included it since this video is over 25 minutes, so it was pretty long. So I had to cut back on some amount of footage, more than usual, I would say. But yeah, so like outside of this immediate block here, I did include some more older buildings, but also mixed it in with a lot more modern stuff. Since I imagine even if this area was, touched by, Allied bombings or something, I imagine, it's possible that they probably would have wanted to keep, its historical nature and probably wanted to rebuild a lot of buildings, similar to, or at least, pretty close to what they were before, they were destroyed. So, yeah, so that's why I mostly kept the historical buildings there in the center, and then as we branch out from this immediate block, they get a little more modern and mixed in with old and new. But as far as the detailing goes in this area, I really don't have that many props that I'm subscribed to. I want, it's a mini series, so I'm trying to keep it, kind of quick. So, and also for just loading the game, of course, I don't want too many props. I want to kind of keep it quick and easy. But of course, I do want to keep it detailed since it is going to be relatively small, the city, compared to, normal projects such as Berlin Noir, which is very much larger. But yeah, I didn't really have many props, at least from this age, right, being 1953, that would fit, in an old town. I probably should have subscribed to those old market props, which I do use in Berlin Noir. But those are a lot of props, and I'm sure I can't really say, how taxing it is on, the load time or the computer, right, with the RAM and all that stuff. So I just figured I wouldn't subscribe to it since I'd really only be able to use it in this one time period and really only in the old town. So I figured I'd just keep it simple, only throw some like tables down and some simple crates and some carts as well. Pretty simple, but hopefully, more people start using the paths, since I did put invisible paths down throughout the little old town there, and some like park people spawner things, so people should hopefully go there and make it look a little more active. So I took out, probably should also remove some of the cars, although my reasoning for keeping the cars in there is I figured, back in 1953, I would figure cars would probably be going through and parking in old towns. I feel like it's a more relatively new concept to, ban cars from some of the roads and streets in like old towns and such, and, even outside of old towns. So yeah, for now, I'm keeping the cars and some of the parked cars in there, and then probably when we get into the 80s or modern days, when I'll remove it and, put some more street props there for, whatever else. But anyways, we are moving on from that, and this is going to be the city hall or town hall, whatever you want to call it. And I actually initially used a completely different building for the town hall, and I actually built that off camera a while ago, just when I was kind of experimenting and laying out the roads and stuff for the city. I built the town hall, and it's a building that I used in Berlin Noirs. I think it's like some sort of administrative building in the Alsace, I think. So it's kind of big. So I just kind of, I don't know, after looking at it and seeing it in with everything else, I kind of realized it's too big for this type of town, right? Since I'm going for something pretty small, not super small, but relatively small. So I figured this building was good, and I've never seen it before. I think it is a new asset, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not actually, now that I say that, I'm not sure, but the asset's something, some sort of hotel in Dresden, I think, which I tried to look it up based on what the asset was called, and I didn't actually see it in Dresden. So I'm not really sure if it's a real asset or not, or if the creator just called it that, just for whatever reason. So I'm guessing it's a real building, but yeah, I don't know, for whatever reason I just couldn't find it. But yeah, so I wanted to go, like I said, with something not super small, but I still wanted something small-ish since it is a relatively small town, but something still noticeable nonetheless that could be, obviously like a town hall or some sort of government building. And then for detailing this area, I initially was actually putting a parking lot, But then I figured maybe 1953 small town Germany wouldn't have a big parking lot that would have been, you know, built by the town hall yet. Overall, I'm not really sure. Again, you know, a lot of this I'm just kind of winging. You know, while obviously I'm trying to make this as accurate as possible, it's inevitable that, you know, other influences, small town influences that I have in the U.S. are going to creep in. I know someone commented that it's interesting seeing, you know, an American build small German town and seeing, you know, the variation. Since, you know, I'm sure a lot of the stuff that if you're from a town like this in Germany, then I'm sure, you know, you're like, that's probably not super realistic. So, but that's just simply because, you know, it's stuff creeping in from my own daily life that I've experienced here in the U.S. and just general town layouts and how where parking lots are and just general stuff like that. So, yeah, occasionally I'm have to kind of fight that and be like, yeah, it's probably not really realistic in 1950s Germany, even though in 1950s US, definitely realistic. But of course, there are big differences, so I obviously have to keep that in mind. But yeah, for the spec area, I don't know, I wasn't really feeling anything. I wasn't really sure what to do. So I just kind of kept it simple since I figured this is something I could then update as we, you know, move on into the 1980s or modern day, whichever time I want to actually update it, make it look a little more, you know, fancy, more modern. Since that's pretty much the reason why I kept it so simple, just with the thought of in the future that I'm going to, you know, destroy it all and rebuild it with something new and modern. So that is why it's pretty simple and rather bland, I'd say. But anyways, moving on from that, I wanted to do some sort of little industrial area, since you know, of course, any city is going to have some sort of industry, especially, you know, in the 1950s. This is probably all still functioning industry, so you know, I probably will eventually replace some of this, or maybe I'll keep the buildings and just kind of make it so it's, you know, I don't know, perhaps some sort of indoor sports field there with that big building there, or yeah, something like that. You know, repurposing it for something for the general public, right? Since that's, you know, something that people like to build and like to see built in city skylines. That's for sure. I feel like I see those types of videos every other week on YouTube, people doing stuff like that. So it's popular. So I figured I might as well, you know, do my own take on that, which is, you know, building it what it is before and then repurposing it after as we move into the 1980s or modern day. But yeah, some of it I did off camera, like the areas around it. So that construction site to the left there, that is actually the base of a modern building. So what I did for that was just convert it to PO and just shrink it down, so it's just basically a little surface. And then when we move into the modern day, I can just plop the building down there exactly where it is, since, like I said, it's literally the base of the building, so it'll fit perfectly there. And then I could just get rid of all the construction props, obviously, and detail it as I want. But also another difficult thing with this industrial zone, at least, was the detailing of the props. Since, again, trying to keep the props down to a minimum, I didn't have too many things in the 1950s that would fit in here. So I figured I'd do just these little piles of, not really sure what type that is. Kind of looks like sand, but I don't think it is sand. And then another issue was these type of excavators, I believe they're called. Yeah, excavators, which I don't think there's anything from the 1950s of this type on the workshop. Since I actually looked up, you know, 1950s excavator, and while they were similar, they had more. I mean, they weren't. Those are clearly modern, I'd say. So I'm kind of stuck using those. I mean, unless someone knows of something I can use to replace that, then definitely let me know, because I would like to replace that with something a little more older, not so clearly modern. But, you know, for now, I mean, it's not a super big deal, I guess, since, as I was saying, the 1950s excavators are definitely similar in style, you know, very similar structure. They just, they were, I can't really think of how to describe exactly how they were differently, but I don't know, I guess you could just look it up yourself if you're curious. But anyways, once again, just continuing with some simple props using these vanilla things, which I believe came with the Industries DLC, which they're actually pretty nice props. I converted them to PO so I can darken them slightly since they were kind of light. I do that kind of frequently with a lot of props, especially vanilla props, since it seems vanilla props tend to be a lot lighter than some of the custom made assets that people make on the workshop, even though nonetheless a lot of those are still very light. So I end up definitely darkening or converting those to PO so I can darken them up a bit. But then also there with those little forklifts, that was another thing where I was like, is this really necessarily accurate to 1950s? And of course I looked up 1950s forklift, and honestly those apparently forklifts haven't really changed much over I guess 70 years or so. So those are actually relatively accurate, I'd say. So I kept those, and although I must say when I look up 1950s forklift, most of those results were stuff in the in the US. Since in the 1950s US there was massive housing boom and just spread to the suburbs and such, everyone owning property. So there's a whole lot of construction being done across the US, with that boosted economy and such. So yeah, I'm not sure what maybe 1950s Germany's forklifts and such might be a little different. But nonetheless, again, I don't think there's anything in the workshop. If there is, let me know and I'll replace that since that's pretty easy. But so moving on to what we have for the last part of today's episode, and this is the Forest Hotel. And as you see, just getting rid of those little or chimneys, I guess, on top of the roof. Since I am modeling this after something in the TV show Dark, since everything up until this point has just been my own, creative builds. I haven't, again, I kind of mentioned already in the episode that in the television show, there's really nothing that shows the actual town itself of Winden. So that's what's given me a whole lot of freedom to more or less build whatever I want in the actual town. But this, I still wanted to include something from the show, and this is the hotel that is in the show. And what's really kind of cool is it's almost like this asset that I'm using is, I think, something for Versailles, I believe. So obviously it's some French like classical architecture, and it's it's a cool asset. I used it actually in my mini series for Mont Saint Michel, since that is in France, and it definitely looked well with the castle or monastery, I think, on the mount or on the little mountain there, Mont Saint Michel. But yeah, so in real life, the hotel used in the show is, I believe, pretty far north of Berlin. But it turns out that I guess the hotel was built in a neoclassical French architecture. And I'll throw a picture there up on the screen of the actual hotel, and you'll see that it looks pretty similar to what we have going on here. So it's pretty just more or less just good luck that that asset happened to exist, and then I was able to use that, since yeah, I'd say it looks pretty accurate to that real life hotel. But did some pretty simple detailing around it. That little dirt parking lot there, which is actually, I think, how it exists in real life today, looking at Google Maps and such. And then off camera, I also did some paths coming out the back, just kind of going throughout the forest. Nothing fancy there, that's just why I cut it out, just to save time on the episode. But this is probably one location that's really not going to change much as we progress into the 1980s and modern day. But nonetheless, something still to include, since it is a pretty iconic location as well in the show Dark. But I guess that's going to be it for today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Yeah, definitely let me know what you thought of the episode, and subscribe if you are new. And I will see you all in another episode. See you then.